Good morning. Today I will be talking about reading strategies. I know this is a writing class, but we do read books and articles and other texts in the class, and I think it's important for my students to know how to effectively read a text, whether it's a book, article, essay, anything you have to read in class. And I would say that these will be really, really helpful, not just for this class, but for all of your classes. So let's get started. So most of the notes that I'm going to be giving you are taken from the book Reading Rhetorically by John Bean. If you want more information on that, it's a really good book. I highly recommend it. Okay, so these are pre-reading tips, and it's just what it sounds like. Before you start reading the text, there's a few things that you can do to help you understand it better. If there is an author's bio or biography available, then I suggest that you read it. And you just can get some idea of which way an argument's gonna go if you get some information about the author in advance. And I have an example here that if it's an article written by a staunch NRA member, then you know that article's probably going to be looking different, have a different point of view than someone who is the president of the group Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. Okay, you should always sit and think about the background knowledge that you know about the text. So if it is going to be an article about gun laws, think about what you do and don't know about gun laws, maybe here in the country, here in Kern County or the state. Maybe write down a few little things. Just writing this down can help you engage, as Bean says, with what you're about to read. More pre-reading tips. Okay, I call this spot reading. It's when you kind of go through and you look at the chapter titles, look at the larger font and the bold print. Usually if it's in bold print or a bigger font, and titles of chapters and different little sections usually have quite a bit of importance, so they'll let you know what you're going to be reading about. If there's pictures and graphs, I'd pay attention to those. And this is all what you do before you just start reading the entire text. Bean also suggests that you read the beginning and the ending paragraphs of a section or an article. The beginning usually introduces the subject and announces the purpose, and the conclusion will usually sum it up so that you know kind of what the main ideas might have been or were supposed to be. If you're reading a textbook, say it's a chemistry textbook, and it provides summaries and study questions, it's a good idea to read those. Sometimes the questions come before the reading so that you know what you're supposed to be learning, and sometimes they come at the end. I would always go to the end of the chapter and look at those questions of how you were supposed to answer them, because that's going to help you know what the main ideas are the text, what the author wants you to come away with when you're done reading that. If there's a book with several chapters, then the table of contents can help you know what you're going to be reading about. Okay, so these are reading tips. This is what you will do during reading. Keep a pen, pencil in your hand. A lot of my students like to keep different colored highlighters or colored pencils nearby. And you will be annotating. So this is just a fancy word for interacting with the text. You're going to be commenting and asking questions. I love, hate this. Why is this? Is this true? It's doing lots of other things. Soon I'm going to assign a video to you just dedicated to annotation, and I will also make you be practicing it. You should be noting confusing or unknown words. Some professionals say that you should look the words right up. My deal is I'm afraid you're going to be looking up on your phone, and then it's too easy to get sidetracked by, I don't know, TikTok or Facebook or email or whatever it is that you get sidetracked by. Most authors, and I believe Bean, he suggests you like somehow circle it or put a star next to it, whatever you prefer. Then when you're done, then go through and look up the definitions of the words. Here is an example of an annotated article. So this student went through, and you notice that he or she really interacted with the text. There's different colors here, there's different notes. You notice the author didn't just take a highlighter and highlight through everything. That is not the way to annotate a text. That will not help you. Okay, so reading tips during reading. Trying to determine the author's intended audience. We talked about, remember, the audience and the purpose are the two big ideas to be thinking about when you're writing something to someone else or when you're trying to communicate with someone else. In the same way it works when you're being on the receiving end of the medium. Try and figure out what the audience, who the author is talking to. So who are they addressing? And often they don't say it explicitly. They don't say this book is, dedicated to, freshman composition students. You have to try to figure that out a lot of times. Okay, so to help determine this, who the audience is that's intended, don't look just at the content of what's being said, but how it's being said. So what's the language like? Are there common everyday words? We call that vernacular. Are there a lot of short simplistic sentences or numerous lengthy ones? Maybe there's a mixture. I've always heard that newspaper articles are written usually at a 6th grade level, so they're pretty simple to read, and that's because they want to make sure that the whole audience as a whole, like the whole community, most of them, if they're adults, can read the text of a newspaper article. So knowing the author's intended audience can just help you understand what the main purpose is. All right, now reading tips during reading. This is while you're actively reading a book or a text. You're going to find the author's purpose. Try to think about the purpose of the author's text. So before you were looking at the audience, trying to figure out what the audience was. Now you're trying to figure out what the author's purpose is. Remember the two big things are audience and purpose when you're communicating. So what point do you think the author's trying to make? Also, how is he or she making the point? Is he or she using a flippant or sarcastic tone? Humorous, serious? You look at all those things. Think of the specific word choices the author makes. Is he calling the act of cutting down trees rape? Or is he calling it timber extraction? So one has a very neutral connotation, right? The timber extraction is very neutral. The other one, rape, has a highly charged negative connotation. And by connotation, I just kind of mean the way a word is kind of, the attitude that a word has in society. I can't think of the right word that I'm trying to think of right now. Okay, so for example here, which word has the negative connotation? Scrawny versus thin. So they pretty much mean the same thing, but one has a more negative connotation than the other. We've got thrifty versus cheap, assertive versus bossy, cunning versus smart, and natural versus plain. So just think about those words and think about which ones have the more negative connotation, more of a negative association with those words by society. All right, post-reading tips. So these will be after you're done reading, not necessarily an entire book, but maybe a section. So after reading a section or paragraph, we call this what it says, what it means. I'd also think about why it matters. So look at the text and look at its literal words, and then think about and write down what it means. So what was the author's purpose? So for example, I have here, the author writes, brain synapses in an adolescent brain often misfire, causing the adolescent to make errors in judgment. So that is what the author says. What the author means is, because their brains aren't fully developed, teenagers do some stupid shit, right? So that's more of the meaning of what the author said. Okay, chunking is another thing that you can do after you're done reading. This is drawing horizontal lines through each section that you think goes together. So not necessarily how the article is. You might have a line through the middle of a paragraph, and then you're going to write that section's main idea or theme in the margin. Maybe just in a sentence or two. You don't need to rewrite the section, just enough to give you an idea when you go back and review. I have, for example, if you're reading an article on marathon running, and the first 3 paragraphs describe the benefits of running, you would chunk that, and maybe the next 2 paragraphs talk about how to train for a marathon, then you could chunk that. It's easier when you go back to study for an exam to see the main ideas of the article. And then you might not have to reread the entire section, which of course will save you time. All right, some more post-reading tips. Remember, this is what you can do afterwards. It's just summarizing. A basic summary requires that you identify the text's main ideas, state them in your own words, and then omit the supporting details, which is just like the small details that don't really affect the story too much. So you might not have realized it, but when you were chunking that marathon article I was referring to in the last slide, you were summarizing small sections at a time. So to summarize a longer text, combine your summaries of the parts of those chunks into a coherent whole, creating a condensed version of the text's main ideas in your own words. And so here I've kind of did this for you. I've given a really brief summary for maybe what those two chunks would have been. And here it is. In the article, Run, Forrest, Run, author and avid runner Miguel Torres tells his readers how to run a marathon and why they should run a marathon. So that's just a summary of the whole article. If you're having trouble getting started on a summary, think of the reporter questions: who, what, when, where, why, and how. They don't always help you with everything, especially every single question, but it's usually a really good place to start. And some of you would rather prefer graphing, especially if you're a visual learner, but not necessarily of words. You do better with pictures. Then it might help you to make a graph or a tree diagram to explore the main ideas. And there is a picture of a nonlinear graph. So you're not just writing sentence after sentence on lined paper. You've got the main idea in the middle, and then maybe different supporting, but still main ideas around the outside. That is it. I hope you guys, this was really helpful. Again, I'm going to be posting a video pretty soon on annotating, and I'll have my own example to share with you guys. Thanks for watching.